Begin today the Gemara towards the bottom of Mem Gimel Amud Beis, where it says Vaharei Maimer, 2 lines from the bottom of the Yamud. The Gemara here brought a Mishnah that discusses a Naira HaMayrasa, a Naira after the first stage of marriage. If she's getting divorced, who could receive the get for her to be divorced? Chachamim say, both her and her father. Rabbi Yehuda says, no such a thing. You can't have 2 individuals that are Zeiche in a get, and therefore it's only the father that's Zeiche in this get. That was the argument in the Mishnah. On this, Rabbi Yechanan said that this machlokes is only regarding Kidushin. But when it comes to Kidushin, to marrying off one's daughter when she's a Naira, everybody agrees that it's only the father that gets the kesef Kidushin and marries her off, and not the girl herself. So the Gemara here brought an explanation for Rabbi Yechanan's opinion. This is Rabbi Yechanan. Reish Lakish disagrees with this. Reish Lakish says Kidushin, Kidushin is the same machlokes. What would be the reason to distinguish between Kidushin and Kidushin? So the Svara of the Gemara here brought, Rabbi Yesi, Bar Chanina said, the explanation of Rabbi Yechanan's statement, when it comes to Kidushin, she's going back into the father's possession. So the father is okay with her accepting her get to come back to him. But when it comes to Kidushin, where she's leaving from the father to go get married, over here, she's in the father's possession, and only the father could receive and decide who she gets married to. She can't receive for herself a Kidushin. That was the Svara the Gemara said. So on this, the Gemara is going to ask a question from another Braisa. Fragt the Gemara, V'harei Maimer. But what's with the halacha when it comes to Maimer? Now, Maimer, as we learned before, is the Kidushin of a Yavam. When a Yavam, that is Mekadesh a Yavama, Midirabanon, there's a Kidushin there, and that's called Maimer. Minatayre, the marriage of a Yavam to a Yavam is only with Bia, but Midirabanon, with Kesef, just like Kidushin, she could be married. So over there, when it comes to Maimer, the Mafkas, Hatzma, Mirishusavia. So she's leaving the father's domain, going to get married to her Yavam. Tanan, or the other gear says the Tanya, we learned in the Braisa, Ketana Mina Edison, that a Ketana that was married and her husband died, and she's waiting to get married to her Yavam. So this was from Edison. The reason why it says Edison, because she's still really in her father's possession. If she was fully married to her husband, then her father has nothing to do with her anymore. But it was only the first stage of marriage. So this katana is still in her father's possession. So ein eisen ba maimer lemidas avia. So the yavam can only do maimer only with the father's consent, because she still belongs to her father. But then it says here in this brayse, v'hanaira, but if she's already a naira, then bein midas atzma, bein midas avia, she can go and get married with this maimer to this yavam, whether with herself, her own agreement, or with her father. Her father's das, doesn't make a difference. So here we clearly see when it comes to maimer, she's leaving the father's possession, and here this brayse says that both her and her father could receive this for her. But we just said the explanation that when it comes to Kidushin, because she's leaving the father's possession, so then only the father could accept for her and she can't accept for herself. So why here by Maimer does it say that Midaita and Midas Avia that she can get married? Okay, now the next words here, Mashenkim Kidushin, is actually the continuation of this Braisa. The Gemara will soon bring it and explain what we see from that. So the Gemara therefore at this point says, Ella, we have to give another explanation for what Rabbi Yechanan said when he made the distinction according to the Chacham's opinion between Kidushin and Kidushin, and the explanation for that distinction is as follows. Ella yitmach yitmer. If we learned an explanation, so we learned as follows. Rabbi Yesi Bar Chanina said, my time with Rabbi Yechanan, what's the reason that Rabbi Yechanan made the distinction between Kidushin and Kidushin? Aliba the Rabbanon, according to the Rabbanon, Kidushin the Midaita, Kidushin only takes effect with the das of the one that's selling herself. So by a usual marriage, it's the Isha herself. By a Naira, where the father, she's in the father's possession, the father's the one that's marrying her off, so we need the das makne, Rashi says. The das makne is the one that has the possession, the rights to marry her off. So therefore by Kidushin, where it all has to be with the consent of the one that's giving her over to the husband, so Avia V'lahi, only the father could receive her Kidushin for her, and she cannot receive that Kidushin for herself. Kidushin, however, when it comes to divorce, the Balkarcha, divorce, you receive the get from the husband when the husband decides to divorce his wife, whether the woman agrees or not. So bein avia, over here it doesn't make any difference. Whether the father will receive the get, either way she'll be divorced. Doesn't make any difference who gets it, because you don't the das of the father doesn't matter over here anyways. So in such a case, it could be both her and her father. Right? So therefore the point over here is that the distinction between Gedushin and Kiddushin is whether you need das. So the machlokes between the Chachamim and Rabbi Yehuda was only regarding Gedushin. But when it comes to Kiddushin, over here you need the das. Everybody agrees that only the father is the one that can marry her off. So now the Gemara again asks the same question, going back to the Braisa that we quoted before from Maimer. So if so, Hossam b'Maimer, when it comes to this Braisa we quoted, by Maimer, which is again the marriage of a Yavam, the Yavam marrying the Yavama, the Balkarcha, one second, Maimer, Harei Maimer I'm holding, sorry, Harei Maimer. But the question, if so, is when it comes to Maimer, de midaita. Seemingly, by Maimer, this is how the Gemara understands right now. This marriage of Maimer of the Yavama to the Yavam is also only with her consent. V'katani beini beinavia. And over here it says that both she and her father could receive the money for this kiddushin of Maimer. But why is that so? Didn't we just say that when it comes to kiddushin, which is only with das, in such a case, only the father could decide, and she can't do it herself? So the Gemara answers, no. Hossam b'Maimer de Balkarcha. Over there, the Kiddushin of Maimer, you do not need the das. Over there, it's the Maimer. She gets married to the Yavam when he gives her the Kesef Kiddushin, even against her will. Why is that? Rebbe, because we're following Rebbe's opinion. The Tanya, we learned in Abraise, in Masechta Yavamis, regarding Maimer. Do you need the das of the Yavama for Maimer or not? So a person marries off, he wants to get married to the Yavama with this Kiddushin, Midrabanan, of Maimer, without her consent. Rebbe Yomer Kana. Rebbe says, you don't need any das for Maimer, it takes effect. Chachamim say, Loi Kana. No, it does not take effect. She's not acquired by this kinyan without her consent. So over here, we're following Rebbe's opinion that Maimer is Balkarchach, so therefore it's similar to Gedushin, where it could be her or her father that can receive it for her. Now the Gemara here brought up this machlekes, so explains the machlekes of Rebbe and the Chachamim. My time with the Rebbe. What's the basis of Rebbe's opinion that says that Maimer is Balkarchach? Gama mibiyah. We compare Maimer, which is the Kiddushin midrabanan for a Yavama, to Biyah, which is the marriage minatayra for a Yavama, the Yavama. Ma Biyah the Yavama Balkarchach. Just like when it comes to Biyah, so over there the marriage minatayra is even against her will. V'yivma, it's even against her will. Av hachanami Balkarchach. So too over here, when it comes to the Kiddushin with the Rabban and Maimer, it's also even against her will. You don't need anyone's consent for this. The Rabbanan Savri, on the other hand, the Rabbanan say, no, Yalfinon Kiddushin. We learn out the din of Maimer, the Kiddushin with the Rabbanan, by a Yavama from regular Kiddushin. Ma Kiddushin the Midaita, just like by regular Kiddushin, you do need the das of the woman or of the father that's marrying her off. Av hachanami the Midaita, over here as well, Maimer Chachamim instituted for a Yavam to be able to marry off with the Rabbanan, with a regular, like similar to a regular Kiddushin, but it's only Midaita. The Gemara explains further the source of their machlokes, b'mai kamiflagi. What is really the basis of their argument, whether I compare it to Biyah of Yavama or I compare it to regular Kiddushin? Rabbi says, Miladi Yavamim Yavama Havalela Melaf. That it makes sense to compare Maimer, which is a Kiddushin with the Rabbanon, specifically by Yavama, from Biyah, which is the marriage minatayra of Yavama. So it makes sense to compare these two that are both specifically by Yavama. But Rabbanan Savri, however, the Rabbanan say, no, Kiddushin Havalela Melaf. Since Maimer is a Kiddushin, it's only a first stage of marriage, similar to regular Kiddushins, even though it's only by Yavama, but it is a Kiddushin. So therefore we learn it out from Kiddushin, not from the Biyah by Yavama, which is an Isuin, which is a full marriage. Okay, now the Gemara explains, going back to what we said before, the Pshat according to Rabbi Yechanan, that Rabbi Yechanan, the reason for the distinction between Kiddushin and Gedushin, that when it comes to Gedushin, so the Chachamim hold that both the father and the daughter herself could receive her get, but not by Kiddushin. So the Pshat we said before was because by Kiddushin, it's only Midas. So over there, only the father can do it. Whereas when it comes to Gedushin, which is Balkarchach, over there, it doesn't make a difference. Over there, she could receive it, her father could receive it. The Gemara now says, this reason that we gave, it's logical that this is Taka the Pshat, like what Rabbi Yechanan said, could become a Taretz Rabbi Yechanan, like Rabbi Yechanan answered and explained, Midiktani Seife, because in that price that we quoted before regarding Maimer, that both her and her father could receive the Kiddushin of Maimer, so it continues, as the Gemara had before, in the parentheses, Masha Ein Kein B'Kiddushin. This is not so when it comes to Kiddushin. By Kiddushin, only her father could receive the Kiddushin for her. So over here, this is the whole point. What's the difference between Maimer and Kiddushin? Maimer is Bal Karchach, so both her father and her could receive it. Kidushin, which is you need the consent of the makna, of the one that's giving her over, so that's the father. So therefore only he could receive the Kiddushin. So that line, Masha Enkim, the Kiddushin, shows this point that there's a difference if it's Bal Karchach or it's Midas. Says the Gemara, Ella, if so, Neime, Tehevi, Teyufte, Derish Lakish. If so, this line of Masha Enkim, the Kiddushin, shall this be a refutation to Rish Lakish's opinion? Rish Lakish said that there's no difference between Gedushin and Kiddushin. By both of them, the Chachamim hold that both her and her father could receive the money for Kiddushin or the get. It's the same thing. But over here it says clearly, Mashaen came by Kiddushin, that by Kiddushin, only the father could receive it first. So this refutes Rish Lakish. Amalach Rish Lakish will answer you, Hamani Rabbi Yehuda. This Braisa here is not the Chachamim. This Braisa is following Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda Bechlal says the Amad is always a rule, Ein Shtei Yadayim Zeiches Kachas. Two people, in this case, the father and the daughter, cannot be Zeiche in one person. Regarding Kiddushin, and the same is really regarding Gedushin as well. Always, it's only the father and not the daughter. So when it says in Mashenkim Kiddushin that only the father could receive the Kiddushin, it's Rabbi Yehuda speaking. Says the Gemara, wait a minute, if it's Rabbi Yehuda, Masha'enkim b'Kiddushin, why is it saying that by Kiddushin, the father is the one that receives the Kiddushin? It could say Masha'enkim b'Gedushin mibayale. It should say even by Gedushin, which is Bal Karchach. You don't even need the father's consent, B'chlal, in this. Rabbi Yehuda argues and says, even regarding Gedushin, that only the father could receive the Gedushin because you never can have two people to be Zeiche regarding one individual. So why did it say Dafka Kiddushin? So the Gemara answers, you're right. If this is Rabbi Yehuda, it could have said so. Enochanami. But Aidi, the Tana Maimer, because in the beginning of this Braisa, it says the halacha regarding the Maimer, where over there both the father and the daughter could receive the money for the Maimer Kiddushin, the Dami le Kiddushin. So since Maimer is a kind of marriage, so it's similar to Kiddushin. So Tananami Mashenkim b'Kiddushin. When it wants to say that there's another case where the halacha is not so, it says Kiddushin. Even though the same would be true regarding Gedushin, and Gedushin is actually a bigger chiddush because Gedushin is Bal Karchach. Now the Gemara asks another obvious question here. Rabbi Yehuda. Now, if this is Rabbi Yehuda, so then Maishna Maimer. Why is Maimer any different? Didn't Rabbi Yehuda say a rule whenever it comes to a girl, whether it's marriage, whether it's divorce, whatever it may be, you can't have two people that have a hand to be zeicher regarding one person. So why by Maimer here, if this is Rabbi Yehuda, why is he saying that by Maimer it's different, that both her and her father could receive the Kidushin for the Maimer? Answers the Gemara, Maimer is a different story. Even Rabbi Yehuda will agree. Why? Because Hayel v'zukuka v'oimedes. Because by Maimer, here she's already tied to this Yavam, just by the halacha that she's not allowed to marry anyone else. So it's already sort of it's partially connected to him. So therefore the Kidushin there, the Maimer is only completing it. In such a case where it's just completing something that exists already, so over here, Rabbi Yehuda will agree that both her and her father could receive it. But both by Kiddushin and Gedushin, where there's a full acquisition, a full change of possession taking effect, over there it's only the father and not her. So Maimer is different. So now the Gemara comes back and says, Hashte, the Asas Lahachi. Now that you come to this conclusion, that Maimer, the fact that over here we see that both her and her father could receive it, is because Maimer comes after already as a kuka, so it's not really a full marriage, it's already half, they're already connected. So Rabbi Yechanan Nami like Tikshilach, the first pshat that we said before, according to Rabbi Yechanan, the first pshat the Gemara said to explain why Rabbi Yechanan makes a distinction between Gedushin and Kiddushin. Why by Gedushin both her and her father could receive it, according to the Chachamim. And why by Kiddushin only her? So the first pshat the Gemara wanted to say is because by Kiddushin, she's leaving the father's possession. So therefore only the father has the right to decide and receive that for her. And the Gemara asked on that from this Braisa, where by Maimer, which is also a Kiddushin, she's leaving the father's possession, and it says that both her and her father could receive it. But now that we explained that Maimer is a different story because she's already Zekuk of Medes, so therefore, Rabbi Yechanan Nami like Tikshalach Meikara. That question we asked in the beginning on Rabbi Yechanan's first, and the first pshat that we said according to Rabbi Yechanan is not a question. Shani Maimer Hoyel Zekuk of Medes. Maimer is different than regular Kiddushin. Regular Kiddushin, when she leaves the father's possession, only the father could receive the Kiddushin for her. Maimer, she's already connected to the Yavam in this case, so she could receive the Kiddushin of the Maimer, not only her father. Okay, so now the Gemara here is going to come back to ask a shaila here. We have here a machlokes between Rabbi Yechanan and Reish Lakish. According to the Chachamim, when it comes to a naira who could marry her off? According to Rabbi Yechanan, when it comes to Kidushin, it's only the father. And when it comes to Kidushin, there, the Chachamim said, both the father and her could receive her get. When it comes to Kidushin, only the father. Rish Lakish says that according to the Chachamim, Kidushin is the same as Kidushin. Her and her father could receive the get, and her and her father can marry her off. So the Gemara now asks, this is all Chachamim. Rabbi Yehuda though disagrees. Rabbi Yehuda holds there's never such a thing that two people could be Zeicha in one person, besides Maimer, as the Gemara just explained. Okay, so now we bring from the Mishnah, from the beginning of the Perek here. So Tanan, what did the Mishnah say? Ha'ish mekadesh es bitoy kishehi naida. A father could marry off his daughter when she's a naida. Boy ubeshlucha, he himself can marry her off, and he can send a shliach to be makabel the kedushin for her. So now, or to give, to receive the money of the kedushin for her instead of the father. Okay, so now the Gemara is medayek. What do we see from here? Boy ubeshlucha, the father himself, he can marry off his daughter or through a shliach. But ba ubishlucha loy. But she, the girl herself, to receive her own kedushin, or to send a shliach to receive her kedushin, she can't. In the beginning of the Mishnah, when it spoke about a isha, it said that the isha herself could send the shliach. That's the beginning of the Perek. When it comes though to a naida, which is in the father's possession, what is it saying here? Only the father can marry her off. She cannot marry herself off. To Yufta de Rish Lakish, doesn't this refute what Rish Lakish said? Because Rish Lakish holds it according to the Chachamim, just like Kidushin, she and her father could receive the get, the same as by the Kidushin, that she could marry herself off. Rish Lakish will answer you, Ha Nami Rabbi Yehuda. The Mishnah in the beginning of our Perek is following Rabbi Yehuda's opinion, and Rabbi Yehuda says that always Kidushin, Kidushin doesn't matter. You can't have two people being zeiche in one girl. So therefore, Rabbi Yehuda Taka holds, like it says in the Mishnah, only the father can marry her off. According to Chachamim, she would be able to marry herself off. This Mishnah here is Rabbi Yehuda. Asks the Gemara, Mi matzes meikmis la ke Rabbi Yehuda. Can you say that the Mishnah in the beginning of the Perek is Rabbi Yehuda? But Vakatani Seifa, it says in the Seifa, which is actually the next Mishnah, it says another halacha, and that does not go like Rabbi Yehuda. What does it say there? Hi Melisha, a person says to a woman, Hiskachili b'tumarazu, should be married to me with this date. Hiskachili b'zu, then he said again, the same term, you should be married to me with this date. And what's the halacha there? So the Mishnah there says, if it turns out that the first date that he says she should be married to him with is not worth a shava pruta, the minimum amount for a Kidushin. Not the first date is worth that amount, and not the second one is worth. Now the question is, should we combine the two and say, since he told you should be married to me with this date, you should be married to me with this date, so we combine the two, and there's a value of a shava pruta here. She's married. So the Mishnah there says that because the husband said twice hiskachi, he said once hiskachili with this date, then he said again hiskachili with this date, so he separated one from another, so you can't combine the two, and she will not be married to him. However, if the husband came and said to her hiskachili b'tumarazu, and then he just added bezu without saying again the word hiskachi, then I could combine the value of the dates together, and they're worth shava pruta, and she'll be married. That's the halacha in the next Mishnah. Now, V'amrina, and that it was said, Man Tana hiskachi. Who's the Tana that says that only if and when you say twice the word hiskachi, that divides one statement from the other, and therefore you can't combine the value of the dates that she should be Mekadeshes. Rabbi said on this, Rab Shimon the Tana of that Mishnah is Rab Shimon. Why? Why Rab Shimon Dafke? The Omar, Rab Shimon says, and here, this case that Gemara is bringing now, that Rab Shimon is speaking about a case where a person makes a shvuas sheker. Someone comes to a person and says, you have my pekodin in your possession. Actually, 5 people come to him. 5 people come to a person and say, we all have something that you're holding for us. And the person makes a shvua for each one of them that I don't have any of your items in my possession. Says Rab Shimon, only if he said the word shvua separately to each individual, he said shvua not for you, shvua not for you, shvua not for you, then he'll be chayiv for the shvua sheker that he made for each one separately. Because the Amar Rab Shimon said, ad sheyema shvua l'chol echad ve'echad. Until he says separately the expression of shvua to each one of these 5 individuals that are trying to collect their item from him, then he'll be chayiv a separate carbon for each one of them that he just said. Okay, so similar regarding the Kidushin, only because the husband said separately, hiskachi, he said that expression of Kidushin again and again, therefore we can't combine the few different dates that are here, that it should be one thing. This is only Rab Shimon's opinion. Soon we'll see in a moment, now Braise, other Tanaim disagree with this, that even without adding Shavua separately, or adding the word hiskachi separately, you still can't combine them together. It's considered to be separate. So this is Rab Shimon. So how do we say that the Tana of the Mishnah here is Rabbi Yehuda if we see that the next Mishnah is Rab Shimon? So it's not Rabbi Yehuda. If you'll argue and say, no, Kula Rabbi Yehuda, we could still say the first Mishnah and this Mishnah is also Rabbi Yehuda. Ubeprati savala Rab Shimon. Regarding this halacha, when you have to divide one date from another, and Rab Shimon says, only if you added that word iskachi again, that's what divides it. Beprati, that's what divides it one from another. Regarding this, he holds like Rab Shimon. So maybe this is all Rabbi Yehuda, and he agrees to Rab Shimon on this point. Says the Gemara, that's not the case. So Misa V'lo, does he hold like Rab Shimon in this point? And here the Gemara brings a braisa that brings the various opinions of Tanoim when it comes to this shvuah. When you made a shvuah for a few individuals, when do I divide it, and he's chai for each shvuah separately, and when do I not divide it? So the braisa says as follows: Vatanya ze'aklal, the rule is as follows. So kolal ein a chai v'lachas. If he made a shvuah for 5 people, a shvuah is sheker, but he included it all as one, then it'll be chayiv only once. Parat, but if he made it individual shvuah for each one of them, then chayiv kolachas v'achas, he'll be chayiv for each one separately. The Gemara here doesn't explain, but the Gemara in Masechta Shvuos explains what the difference is, including it or dividing it. This is Rab Meir's opinion. Now Rabbi Yehuda says, what's considered to be dividing one shvuah from another? Shvuah, if he says like this, shvuah loylacha, I make a shvuah that I don't have, what's yours? And then he said loylacha, chayav kolachas v'achas. Even without putting in another word shvuah in between, just by saying loylacha, and loylacha, he's going to be chayav for each one separately. Now Rashi clarifies, that's only if, when he said loylacha and loylacha, he didn't say with a vav, vil loylacha. If he would say vil loylacha, then it's considered to be all one thing. As long as he said loylacha and then loylacha without a vav in between, even if there's no separate word shvuah that he said in between, it'll be separated. So here we see clearly Rabbi Yehuda holds you don't need the actual word shvuah to separate one shvuah from another. Not like Rab Shimon that says that you need the word shvuah to separate. Now there's another opinion there. Rabbi Lazar says loylacha, v'loylacha, and then in the end he says shvuah. Only if the word shvuah is mentioned at the end, then chayav kolachas v'achas. So Rabbi Lazar holds if you put the word shvuah in the beginning, so then everything that follows is considered to be one. If you put shvuah at the end, so then each shvuah is considered to be separate. Now here comes the opinion of Rab Shimon, which we mentioned before. Rab Shimon says, La'olam ein chayiv, he's not going to be chayiv separately for each shvuah, ad sheyoma shvuah l'chol echad ve'echad, unless he used a separate expression of shvuah for each one. So here we see clearly that Rabbi Yehuda disagrees with Rab Shimon. Rabbi Yehuda holds you don't have to put the word shvuah separately. So that applies back to this Mishnah that the Gemara is quoting, the Sefer, the next Mishnah here, that talks about hiskachi. When there's one date and another date and they're not a shava pruta, could you combine them or not? So according to Rab Shimon, only if you said separately hiskachi, then you can't combine them. But not according to Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda disagrees. Rabbi Yehuda says, even if without saying separately hiskachi, you can't combine 2 different statements, just like by the shvuah, you can't, l'cha and lei l'cha is considered to be separate. So we can't say that Mishnah there is Rabbi Yehuda. So therefore the Gemara says, Ela, Reish Lakish will answer you, Kula Rab Shimon. Really, it's all Rab Shimon. This is all Rab Shimon's opinion here. This is not the Chachamim speaking, because again, according to the Shlakish, Chachamim hold that both the father and the girl herself could receive her Kidushin. But it's really all Rab Shimon. And then according to Rab Shimon, in the next Mishnah, in order that you shouldn't combine one tamar, one date with another, it's only if you put in that word iskachi in between. And regarding the first Mishnah, where it says that only the father could be Mekadesh's daughter or make a shliach, and not her herself, here, regarding this, Rab Shimon holds like Rabbi Yehuda that says 2 people can't be zeicha and 1 girl. So this is all Rab Shimon, and Rab Shimon holds like Rabbi Yehuda, not according to the Chachamim. So there's no question on Reish Lakish. Now the Gemara brings an incident that happened in the Bismedrish regarding this machlokes of Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish. Ravasi loy all lebei medrasha. One day Ravasi did not come to shul, did not come to the yeshiva to learn. Ashkechele Rab Zera, so he found Rab Zera Amalei asked Rab Zera, "My Oma idna be medrasha." What was learned today in the Bismedrash? Amalei, Rab Zera said, "Afanole ayil." I also wasn't in Bismedrash today. Rab Oven who dial. Rab Oven, he was in the Bismedrash today. And Va'amar, and he said as follows: Chavrusa kula kerab Yechanan. All of the Chachamim there in the Bismedrash, they all said like Rabbi Yechanan's opinion that the halacha, that the Chachamim said that a father and a daughter could receive the get is only by a get and not by Kidushin. By Kidushin, only the father could receive the money for the Kidushin. So everybody agreed to Rabbi Yechanan. V'tzavach Reish Lakish ki kruchya. And Reish Lakish was screaming like a kruchya. I'm not exactly sure what a kruchya is. Rashi here says it's the targum of the word ogur, some animal. So Reish Lakish was screaming and arguing that how could you make a distinction between Kiddushin and Gedushin? V'yatza v'haisa. It says in the Torah, v'yatza v'haisa. V'yatza is the divorce, v'haisa is the marriage that we compared it to. As we had many times, we compared it to. Taisus here says, Reish Lakish himself knew that this hekesh of v'yatza v'haisa, you don't always compare them. There are exceptions to this. But still, he was screaming, trying to make the point that according to the Chachamim, the halacha of the Gedushin, the halacha of the Kiddushin is the same. That if by Gedushin, both her and her father receive her get, by Kiddushin it's the same thing. Her and her father could receive the money for the Kiddushin. So this is what Reish Lakish was screaming. The lekek, the ashkach bey. Nobody paid attention to Reish Lakish. They all agreed to Rabbi Yechanan. That's what he repeated in the name of Rab Oven. Amalei, so Ravasi asks Rab Zera, Rab Oven bar Samchahu could rely on what Rab Oven said about what happened in the Besmedrash. Amalein, yes, for sure we can rely on him, and for sure in this case, because Kimin Yama Latignihu, because he reported of what happened in the shul right after it happened, similar to when you take out a fish from the water and you put it straight onto the pan to fry, meaning it was fresh. He just came out of the Bismedrash and he reported this, so we're not going to suspect that he didn't report properly. That's Rashi's pshat. Taisus brings the pshat of Rabbeinu Hananel that Yama and Tigni are simply two places that are very close to each other, and it's saying he just came out of shul, so therefore there's no reason to think that he didn't report properly what happened in the shul. Amar Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak. Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak wanted to know, Ana loy Rav Oven bar Chia v'loy Rav Oven bar Kahana. When I heard about this that Rav Oven reported, I didn't hear which Rav Oven it was. I didn't hear if it was Rav Oven the son of Rav Chia, or was it Rav Oven the son of Kahana? El Rav Oven Stam. I just heard that Rav Oven said this. So he wanted to know which Rav Oven it was. So the Gemara says, Lamai nafkemina. What's the relevance to know which Rav Oven this was? The relevance would be, says the Gemara, Lemirme didei adidei. If we would have a question on what he said, and we want to know, is he the one that said it? And we have a contradiction on what he said, so it's important to know which Rav Oven said this. The Gemara brings down another shaila regarding the subject. Rava asked the following Geboy from Rav Nachman. Mahu Naida, that is. When a Naida, this is now according to the opinion of the Chachamim, right? The Chachamim said that when it comes to a Naida, both her and her father could receive her get. That's after she was married, the first stage of marriage, so she didn't leave the father's possession yet. She and her father could receive her get. Now, the question is, though, Mao Shatasa Shliach Lekabel Gita Miyad Bailo. So we know that she could receive her get, but could she also appoint a Shliach to receive the get in her place from her husband? Do I say Kiyada V'Yadamya, that she is just like the hand of the father? She's still in the father's possession, and she's just like the hand of the father, like a Chotza V'Yadamya, or she's like the courtyard of her father. So the Gemara explains, Kiyada V'Yadamya, is she considered to be just like the hand of the father herself, and therefore she can receive the get for herself, and therefore Ma V'Ya Mishav Shliach, just like the father could appoint a Shliach for this, Afinami Mishav Shliach, being just like the father, she could also appoint a Shliach. Or maybe she's only considered to be like the property of her father. She's a possession of her father. The reason she could receive the get is because she's like a domain of her father, like a chatzah. And so therefore she can't appoint a shliach. Only if the get is given into her hands like the father's chatzah, then she'll be divorced, but she can't appoint a shliach for this. That was the shaila that Rav asked Rav Nachman. So the Gemara asks on this, is this a shaila that Rava asked? Does Rava have such a kind of a doubt regarding a woman that maybe she's considered to be like a chotzer of the father, and therefore if she receives the get, she'll be divorced? But Rava said regarding receiving a get, we learned this in Masechta Gittin. Kosav get, a husband writes a get, v'nosnei biyad avda, and he gave the get to the wife's slave. Yashon, if he's sleeping, umisham rasai, and she's guarding him, So he's sleeping, he's not going anywhere. And then Arei a get. So then the fact that the get is in the hands of the Eved, it's like her courtyard, it's like her domain, and she'll be divorced. Neir, but if the Eved himself is awake and he's walking around, ain't a get. So then it's not a get, because even though the Eved belongs to the Isha and he is like her courtyard, but he's not mishtamer. He's walking around, he's not guarded for her, so therefore the get is not a get. If you remember, the Gemara actually there added another detail that it's not enough that he's asleep, at least according to one opinion. He also has to be tied, kofus. Only then will it be a get. Okay, so now Amai ain't a get. Why isn't it a get? Because this is a chatzar. The Eved is like her domain and it's protected in his hands, but not for her. He's walking around independently, so he can't receive the get for her. Now, but so over here, coming back to the daughter receiving a get for the father, for the sake of the father, because she belongs to the father. If you're going to say that she could receive the get because she's like the chatzar of the father, so when the get comes into her hands, she shouldn't be divorced. You're asking a shayla whether she could appoint a shliach. Even if she receives the get herself, she shouldn't be divorced. Because she is an independent person that's walking around, so she's a chatzar of the father, but it's not mishtamer, it's not guarded there for the father. She walks around independently. So it can't be that there's any svara to say that she's receiving the get as a chatzar of the father. Elo, says the Gemara, so therefore it's obvious that the fact that she could receive a get for the father is because she's like an extension, she's like the hand of the father. So now what's the shaila, whether she could appoint a shliach or not? Nevertheless, Rabbi had a shaila, mi alima kiyadavia l'shavia ihi shliach, is she mamish exactly identical like the father himself, and therefore she could appoint a shliach for this just like the father can? Oiloi, she's like the father's hand, but she's still not exactly like the father himself, and she can't appoint a shliach for this. Amalei, Rav Nachman answered, Einais a shliach. She cannot appoint a shliach for this. She could only receive the get herself. So this the Gemara asks from a Mishnah in Gittin, Eisvei, the Mishnah there says, Ketana, if there's a Ketana that was married. Sha'amra, she says, Hiskabali Gitti, receive the get for me. Ain't a get, so the get that she tells a shliach to receive the get for her, so the get does not take effect, actually agia get liyada, until the get comes into her hands. And the reason for this is because a katana cannot appoint a shliach. So that get, if it comes to her hands, she'll be divorced, but the shliach can't receive it for her. That's the halacha of the Mishnah. But there it says this halacha specifically regarding a katana. Ha naira. So what I understand from that Mishnah is, if she would be a naira, so now she already has her own das. She's already bas mitzvah. Harei get. If she appoints a shliach, she could receive the shliach, that is, could receive the get for her, and she'll be divorced. So here we clearly see a naira, and we're talking here a naira after the first stage of marriage, so she's still in the father's possession, but she could receive her own get, and she could also appoint a shliach to receive the get for her. Not like Rav Nachman that said that she can't appoint a shliach. Answers the Gemara, what is that Mishnah speaking about? B'shein la'av. She doesn't have a father. So therefore now she's not in the father's possession. She's in her own possession. So she could appoint a shliach. Frag the Gemara, how could he say that Mishnah there, that she doesn't have a father? The next din there in the Mishnah is Im Omar Loi Avia Tzevekabel Get Lebiti. What's if the father of this girl goes and tells a shliach, receive the get for my daughter? So now if the husband wants to retract from this get, lo yachser, he can't retract anymore once the get was given to the shliach, even before the father got it. And the reason is because the shliach received the get on behalf of the father, and she's already divorced. Even before it comes to the father's hands, he's a shliach lekabbalah, and she's divorced immediately. So that's the seifa of that Mishnah. So clearly, there's a father here. Miklal dereisha b'diyash lav askinon. So if so, the reisha of the Mishnah is also speaking about a case where there is a father, and nevertheless we learn out from the reisha of the Mishnah that a naira could appoint a shliach. Answers the Gemara, chasuri mechsere. There's words missing here in this Mishnah, and we'll have to explain the Mishnah here as follows. V'hachi ketani, this is how you learn this Mishnah. Ketana shomer eskabeli giti. A ketana says to a shliach, receive the get for me. Ain't a get, so the get will not be a get achi agia get liyala till it comes to her hands, because she's a ketana and she can't appoint a shliach. Now from this we learn out, ha naira hareza get, but a naira that appoints a shliach for her, it will be a get when the shliach receives it, because she could appoint a shliach. Now on this you have to add and explain, this is all true if she has no father. So she's in her own possession. She can appoint a shliach. But in a case where she has a father, so then she can't appoint a shliach. It's only the father that could receive the get or appoint a shliach for this. And va'amar Avia, the father said to a shliach, "Tzei v'kabel lebiti gita, go receive the get for my daughter." V'roitze ba'al achzar, after the shliach received the get, the husband wants to retract from the get. Lo yachzar, he can't retract because the father could appoint the shliach and he already received the get and she's divorced already. So the reisha is where there's no father, and the seifa is where there is a father. So it's not a question on the halacha that Rav Nachman said. Okay, the Gemara now brings another halacha. Itmer, we learned the following halacha. Ketana sheniskacha shaleila dasavia. A ketana that went and got herself married, Kidushin, first stage of marriage, but without the father's consent. Now in such a case, if there's no consent to the father and she's a ketana, nobody disagrees about this, that she has no power to marry herself off. But still, what's the halacha now if she went and did it anyways? Amar Shmuel said, tzricha get, she's going to have a get from the husband, and also, tzricha mi'un. Also, there's a halacha of mi'un. Now, mi'un usually applies in a case where there's a kedushin midrabanan of a ketana. That's usually if she's a yisayma, her father died, and her mother or brothers marry her off. If she wants to leave that marriage, she has to refuse the marriage. That's what's the halacha of mi'un. So over here, she's the ketana that married herself off in the lifetime of her father. And she has no rights, she has no ability to marry herself off. Nevertheless, Shmuel says she's going to need both. She needs a get from the husband, and additionally, she has to be memayin in this marriage. She has to refuse this marriage. Now, Omar Karna said about this halacha of Shmuel, Dvarim Begoy. There's something here that's not understood. This is, I have a question on this. In get, if she needs a get, which indicates that this is a real marriage, so then lama miyan. Why would you need her to refuse this marriage, which is usually only by a kedushin midrabanan when she's a katana? In miyon, if she has to refuse the marriage because she went and married herself off, it's not a real marriage, so you don't need a get for this. So then lama get. Why would you need a get for this? Something is not understood here in what Shmuel said. Okay, so now they didn't know if they should accept Shmuel's psak din because Karna said he doesn't understand it. So now what did they do? Omrulei, they said to Karna that asked this question on what Shmuel said, and they were not where Shmuel was. Shmuel lived in Pumbedisa, Rashi here brings, and they were far from Pumbedisa. They couldn't ask Shmuel to explain his halacha. So they told Karna, you have a question on what Shmuel said, Hamar ukve ubeidine bekfari, Mar ukve, and his bezdin, he was the Reish bezdin, and he's there in Kfari, which is not far. You can go and ask Mar Ukva about this. But the Gemara says the end was they did not ask Mar Ukva, rather they sent this Shaila to Rav. And when they sent the Shaila to Rav of Chua and Shadrua lekamei de Rav, they switched over here the opinions and they sent the halacha to Rav. They switched and they said Karna was the one that said you need a get and miyun, and Shmuel was the one that had a problem with this. Shmuel is the one that had a question on this. So Rashi explains the reason why they did that is because they knew that Rav is Shmuel's friend. And if they're going to say it the way it was, that Shmuel is the one that said that you need a get and a miyun, so Rav, being Shmuel's friend, will immediately agree to Shmuel, even though we find so many times Rav argues with Shmuel in Shas. But nevertheless, they switched it around, that Shmuel is the one that questioned this halacha, and they wanted to see how the Rav would react. So Amalahu, when this came to Rav, so Rav said, Ha'alekim, this is a lashon of a shua, I could swear, that tzricha get and tzricha miyun. That the halacha is, in such a case, a ketana marries herself off, she needs a get and miyun. And not only that, he said regarding Shmuel himself, the chasle lezara, the abba bar abba, the name achi. It can't be that the descendant of Abba bar Abba, this is Shmuel's father, which in other words he's saying on Shmuel himself. It can't be that Shmuel would say, like you quoted in the name of Shmuel, that he disagreed that you need both a get and miyun. Now, the Gemara explains, so what's the reason in a case where a ketana marries herself off, why do you need both, a get and miyun? Amar Ravacha Berei Rav, so Ravacha the son of Rav explained, Berei Rav Ikke, that is, Ravacha the son of Rav Ikke explained as follows, that there's a suffix here, what happened? Tzricha get, she'll need a get, in other words, maybe it's a proper Kidushin, because Shemen is Ratzav Kidushin. Maybe the father does agree to this Kidushin, so maybe the Kidushin took effect. Tzricha miyon, and she also needs miyon, because Shema Leinis Ratzav Kidushin. Maybe the father did not agree to this Kidushin, Now, what's the halacha though? If people will see that she's getting a get from her husband, now people will think that she actually was married to this man and she got divorced from him. So now, what the Gemara is going to bring up over here is the halacha of achois isha. The halacha is a person is married to a woman. Now, forever, he's not allowed to marry that woman's sister. Even after he divorces his wife, he's never allowed to marry the sister as long as the first sister is alive. So now, people are going to say, V'yoimru ein Kidushin toivsim ba'achoisa. People are going to think that the Kidushin does not take effect over here in the sister, and therefore this could come out a big problem. People might think that she can go out without any get, and therefore, Chachamim said that you should have to have miyun as well. Because possibly there was no Kidushin of the sister. And when this same man is not going to be Mekadosh a sister, maybe that Kidushin will take effect. Right? So therefore, you have to have miyun, so it should be clear to people that possibly the Kidushin did not take effect. So if now the sister gets married to this man, it's a chayis isha. It's not a chayis isha, that is. It's not a chayis isha, and maybe that second Kidushin took effect. So people should know that that sister would need a get. Okay, so in other words, to cover the suffix here, whether she was married to this man, whether she was not married to this man, either way, you have to have a get and miyun. Says the Gemara, Rav Nachman, what Rav Nachman says about this whole doubt that maybe the father agreed, that's only if there was an engagement, there was a shidduchin, if there was an engagement, and then she went and was makabel kedushin from that man that she was engaged to, so then I say that possibly the father agreed, because the father already agreed to this shidduch. Ula argued on what Shmuel said. Ula said, a girl that goes and marries herself off without the father's consent, she needs nothing. She doesn't need even mian at all. She can go free with no get. She doesn't have to refuse. Now the Gemara asks on this, what did Shmuel say? Afal gav de shitchu? Does this mean even in a case where there was an engagement, are we not going to be concerned that maybe the father agreed not to this marriage? So the Gemara says, no, you can't say that regarding Ula, because man de masni ha le masni ha. The one that explained regarding Shmuel's opinion that we're only concerned that the father agrees if there was a shidduch, that doesn't apply to what Ula said. According to Ula, in a case where there was a shidduch, then Ula would agree that maybe the father agreed to this marriage here, and therefore she wouldn't need a get. When Ula said that she needs nothing, she can go out without anything, that's without a shidduch. This is one version of what Ula said. Ikadamri, there's another version of what Ula said. Omar Ula, that Ula said, either way, ketana sheniskacha, shaloi ledas avia, a ketana that got married without the father's consent, and it doesn't matter whether there was a shidduch before or there was no shidduch before, it makes no difference. Afila miyun eina tzricha. She can leave this marriage, she doesn't need a get, and she doesn't need any miyun at all. That's the machlokes here. So basically, Ula disagrees with Shmuel, and Ula says there's no such a thing of a ketana getting married herself without her father. So now the Gemara here is going to ask two questions of this. I'd like to finish off the Gemara until the end of the Inyan, which is a little further down on the next Amud. Says the Gemara, Masav Rav Kahana, so Rav Kahana asked on Ula. This is the first Mishnah here in Masechta Yevamis. If you remember, the first Mishnah in Masechta Yevamis talks about the fact by the mitzvah of Yibum, when the husband dies and the Yavam has to marry his wife, the brother has to marry the wife. If the wife or the first husband, the wife, is a erva, there's an isser of an erva to the brother, so then the mitzvah of Yibum does not apply. Furthermore, the Mishnah says, if the first husband had more than one wife, there are tzares, there are other wives, co-wives, so then if one wife is an erva, then the mitzvah of Yibum doesn't apply to any of them either. Now, on that, the Mishnah there says, V'kulon, in all of these different ervas that are mentioned there, I believe it mentions there 15, Rashi here brings, there are 15 arayas that it counts there in the Mishnah. Im Mesu, if the erva died, or Mienu, or the erva, this second wife that's an erva, was married, but she refused the marriage, as mentioned before, by a katana, this refusing marriage, or in Isgarsha, or got divorced, or it turns out that the whole marriage was a mistake because she's an islandess, she can't have any children, so the whole marriage was not a marriage. And this all happened before the husband died. So this erva is gone, is not a wife anymore by the time the first husband died. So then, so then the other wife is mutter for the mitzvah of Yibum for the brother. Because only if there's an erva there, and then all the tzaras are potter from Yibum. But not if that erva is gone in any of these ways before the first husband passed away. So now the Gemara is going to focus on over here regarding what it said, mi'un, that we had over here, a wife, which was married, the erve, and she was memayin before the first husband died. Now, what is this talking about over here? The Kidushin man. Who was Makadasher? Now, as Rashi explains, what the Gemara is focusing on over here is, amongst the 15 arayas that it mentions there, that a brother can't fulfill the mitzvah of Yibum because this woman is an erva to him, is bitay. If his brother married a niece, his daughter. Right, so over here it's saying that this brother is not, there's an erva here, this girl, she's his daughter, and therefore he can't do the mitzvah of Yibum for her. And this daughter is one of these 15, and regarding this it says mian, that this daughter could be memayin in the marriage. Now this relates right back over here to this halacha that we're speaking about. When a girl that still has her father alive, which in this case is the brother, which is still alive, and still she was in a marriage to the first husband, and she's being memayin in that marriage. What exactly is the case over here that she's being memayin in the marriage? According to Ula, there's no being memayin. A girl that married herself off in the lifetime of the father, there's no such a thing as miyun. The marriage doesn't exist at all. So again, the Gemara asks, the Kidushin man, who exactly married off this daughter of this brother now that we're saying that she was memayin, that she's refusing the marriage? If the case over here is her father, which is the brother, her father, which is still alive, was the one that married her off, b'miyun sagila? Could the Mishnah there say that she refused in the marriage? Get malya. If the father married her off, she would need a get. It's a full marriage, and she would need a get to be released from her first husband. Elola. So don't you think what this case over here is? The kitcha I nafsha. She married herself off without her father's consent. Vikatani, and here it says the boy miyun. It says here that she's memayin, she refuses in the marriage. So this is a question on Ola that says that a katana that marries herself off without the father's consent, you need nothing. You don't even need miyun either. So the Gemara answers and says, "Who ma'isiv la, v'hu mefarik la." Rav Kahana asked this question on Ula, and he also gave the answer. And he said there is a case, even in the lifetime of the father, where a katana could marry herself off midrabanan. When is that? She could become like a Yisayma even in the lifetime of the father. Rashi explains, when is that? If she got fully married in the lifetime of the father, not just Kidushin, but Nisuim, fully married. Once she's fully married, she leaves the father's domain altogether, even if she's a katana. And then her husband divorced her. After the husband divorces her, she does not go back to her father's domain. So now she's basically a Yisayma in the lifetime of the father. Her father has no rights or possession over her, and she now could go and marry herself off, or her brothers can marry her off, and this will be a Kidushin midrabanan that she could be memayin. And that's what the Mishnah in the beginning of Yavamis is speaking about. But not in a regular case where she's still in the domain of the father. If she's still in the domain of the father and she married herself off, then it's nothing. One more question the Gemara asks over here. Masav Rav Amnuna asks, "Ein moicherin lekroivim." This is the halacha of selling of a father selling his daughter as a maid. So the Tanakama here says that you cannot sell your daughter as a maid to a relative, and the reason is because it has to be possible for the master or the son of the master to do yiyud, to marry her. And we learn from the pasuk there, according to this opinion, that if it's impossible to marry, you can't sell as a maid either. Now, but Mishom Rabbi Eliezer Amru, in the name of Rabbi Eliezer was said, no, you could sell a maid even to a relative. Rabbi Eliezer learns out from a pasuk, she could be sold just as a maid, even if the master cannot marry her. That's the machlokes. Now, there, the Braisa or Mishnah, we had this before in this Masechta here. It continues, Vishavin, they both agree, Shemoichra almana l'kohen gadol and grusha l'chalitza l'kohen hedyet, that the father could sell her as a Amma, even while she's an Almana, to a Kohen Gadol, or a Grusha, or Chalutza to a Kohen Hedyet. And the point that it's saying over here is, even though it's forbidden to marry a Kohen Gadol to marry an Almana, or a regular Kohen to marry a Grusha or Chalutza, but if they get married, the Kidushin takes effect. So therefore, there's a possibility for Kidushin to take effect. So even the Tanakama will agree that says that you could only sell as a maid if marriage is possible. Marriage is possible. So therefore, you can sell a maid, an almana to Kohen Gadol. So now the Gemara is going to focus here on this when it says almana le Kohen Gadol. And the reason why this is relevant over here to what we're speaking about is because we're talking about a father selling his daughter as a maid. When could a father sell his daughter as a maid? Only as a katana. So here basically we see that there's a Braisa saying that there's a katana that's an almana. How did she? And this almana here is being sold by the father. After she became an almana, she's being sold as an almana to this Kohen Gadol to be a maid. Now here, so the Gemara asks on this. Hi almana heichidami. This almana here, what exactly is the case over here? If the case over here is that the father had married her off. Now the question is, what happens if her father married her off and then her husband dies and she goes back to the father's possession? Could the father now sell her as a maid? We had before in the Masechta, it says, Mi motzi mazmala, could he sell her? The halacha is, a father cannot sell his daughter for a maid after he already married her off. Once he married her off and she left his possession, even though she comes back to him after the husband dies. And here, it's even talking about a case where it was only after Kidushin, even if it's not after Nisuin. If it was after Nisuin, she never goes back to the father's possession, right? But even if this was only after Kiddushin, and she does go back to the father's possession, but nevertheless, a father cannot sell a daughter for a maid after he married her off. So what does it mean when it says that he's selling her as an almana, as a maid, to a Kohen Gadol? How's he selling her after she's an almana and he already married her off? Ella, don't you think what's the case over here? Ella lav, the Kaddish ihi nafsha. She married herself off. And that's how she became an almana. The father never married her off. The kakari la almana. And we're referring to her as an almana. What does this prove to you? This is a question on what Ula said. Ula said when a girl marries herself off without the father's consent, it's nothing. But over here we see that she married herself off, and then the husband dies. She's called an almana, and now the father is selling her as a maid. So this is a question on Ula. Amar Rav Amram, Amar Rav Yitzchak. Rav Amram explained the name of Rav Yitzchak, and we had this earlier in the Masechta, this pshat already. Hacha b'kiddushay yiyud. Over here, you know how she became an almana, not because the father married her off. The father never married her off. The father sold her once before as a maid. And now after she was sold as a maid, the master went and married her. Now, but over here the Gemara clarifies, if you remember, we had earlier in the Gemara, when the master marries her, how does the master marry her? Does the master marry her with the money that he paid in the beginning when he bought her as a maid, with that original money that he bought her? That's how he has the power to marry her? Or no, it's with the end, at that money, that the value of her work at the end, with that she didn't work yet for him, with that the father marries her off. So the Gemara explains, Valiba, the Rabbi Yosef, Rabbi Yehuda, we're following here the opinion of Rabbi Yosef, Rabbi Yehuda, the Amud, that said, Mois Harishayna is the money that was paid for her in the beginning, for her being acquired as a maid, Lavle Kidushin Nitnu. Those money is only being given to acquire her as a maid, but it's not the same money that's used for Kidushin as well. So the pshat over here is, if the money in the beginning that the master paid for was both for her being a maid and for Kiddushin, so that basically means that the father once married her off before. Because when he sold her as a maid, he didn't only sell her as a maid, he sold her as a maid and also basically married her off, because that money that he received in the beginning was for Kiddushin as well. So he wouldn't be able to sell her a second time. Because again, the rule is he can't sell her a second time after he married her off. But since we're following Rabbi Yosef, Rabbi Yehuda's opinion that says that when the master marries this maid, it has nothing to do with the money that he gave the father didn't marry her off. That's a separate thing later, that in the time that's left and the value of her work, he's marrying her with that value of the money of her work. So the father never married her off before. She got married by the master, and then that master died, and now the father is selling her a second time. That's how she's an almana. So therefore, it's not a question on Ula, how could you have a katana that's an almana? The katana that's an almana is when the master married her off, not when the father married her off.